There we go. All right. Now that we have sound, I can hopefully get on with this. Can't hear myself, so we'll just assume everything's working. Get on with the reading. It's not working. This chat bot. Let's reload that. Oh, okay. Excuse me. Maybe they were trying to phase it out. Alright. Just gonna leave that as that and start reading. Been 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It's been a bit, half a month. So we're on chapter 6 of part whatever. Let me see. Still on question 1, so hopefully we can finish part 2, question 1 today. Chapter 6, How Witches Impede and Prevent the Power of Procreation. Concerning the method by which they obstruct the procreant function, both in men and animals, and in both sexes, the reader may consult that which has been written already on the question, whether devils can, through witches, turn the minds of men to love or hatred. There, after the solutions of the arguments, a specific declaration is made relating to the method by which, with God's permission, they can obstruct the procreant function. But it must be noted that such obstruction is caused both intrinsically and extrinsically. Intrinsically, they cause it in 2 ways. First, when they directly prevent the erection of the member, which is accommodated to fructification. And this need not seem impossible when it is considered that they are able to vitiate the natural use of any member. Secondly, when they prevent the flow of the vital essences to the members in which resides the motive force, closing up the seminal ducts so that it does not reach the generative vessels, or so that it cannot be ejaculated or is fruitlessly spilled. Extrinsically, they cause it at times by means of images, or by the eating of herbs, sometimes by other external means, such as a cock's testicles. But it must not be thought that it is by the virtue of these things that a man is made impotent, but by the occult power of devils' illusions, which is by this means procure such impotence, namely, that they cause man to be unable to copulate, or woman to conceive. And the reason for this is that God allows them more power over this act, by which the first sin was disseminated, than over other human actions. Similarly, they have more power over serpents, which are the most subject to the influence of incantations, than over other animals. Weird sense. Wherefore it has often been found by us and other inquisitors that they have caused this obstruction by means of serpents or some such things. For a certain wizard who had been arrested confessed that for many years he had by witchcraft brought sterility upon all the men and animals which inhabited a certain house. Moreover, Nider tells of a wizard named Stadlin, who was taken in the diocese of Lausanne, and confessed that in a certain house where a man and his wife were loving, he had by his witchcraft successively killed in the woman's womb 7 children, so that for many years the woman always miscarried. And that in the same way he had caused that all the pregnant cattle and animals of the house were during those years unable to give birth to any live issue. And when he was questioned as to how he had done this, and what manner of charge should be preferred against him, he discovered his crime, saying, I put a serpent under the threshold of the outer door of the house, and if this is removed, fecundity will be restored to the inhabitants. And it was as he said, for though the serpent was not found, having been reduced to dust, the whole piece of ground was removed, and in the same year fecundity was restored to the wife and to all the animals. Another instance occurred hardly 4 years ago in Reichshofen. There was a most notorious witch who could at all times and by a mere touch bewitch women and cause an abortion. Now the wife of a certain nobleman in that place had become pregnant and had engaged a midwife to take care of her, and had been warned by the midwife not to go out of the castle, and above all to be careful not to hold any speech or conversation with that witch. After some weeks, unmindful of that warning, she went out of the castle to visit some women, who were met together on some festive occasion. And when she had sat down for a little, the witch came, and as if for the purpose of saluting her, placed both her hands on her stomach, and suddenly she felt the child moving in pain. Frightened by this, she returned home and told the midwife what had happened. Then the midwife exclaimed, "Alas, you have already lost your child." And so it was proved when her time came, for she gave birth not to an entire abortion, but little by little to separate fragments of its head and feet and hands. And the great affliction was permitted by God to punish her husband, whose duty it was to bring witches to justice and avenge their injuries to the Creator. And there was in the town of Mersburg, in the diocese of Constance, a certain young man who was bewitched in such a way that he could never perform the carnal act with any woman except one. And many have heard him tell that he had often wished to refuse that woman and take flight to other lands, but that hitherto he had been compelled to rise up in the night and to come very quickly back, sometimes over land and sometimes through the air, as if he were flying. Chapter 7. How, as it were, they deprive man of his virile member. We have already shown that they can take away the male organ, not indeed by actually despoiling the human body of it in the manner which we have already declared, and of this we shall instance a few examples. In the town of Ratisbon, a certain young man who had an intrigue with a girl, wishing to leave her, lost his member, that is to say, some glamour was cast over it, so that he could see or touch nothing but his smooth body. In his worry over this, he went to a tavern to drink wine, and after he had sat there for a while, he got into conversation with another woman who was there, and told her the cause of his sadness, explaining everything, and demonstrating in his body that it was so. The woman was astute, and asked whether he suspected anyone. And when he named such a one, unfolding the whole matter, she said, "If persuasion is not enough, you must use some violence to induce her to restore to you your health." So in the evening the young man watched the way by which the witch was in the habit of going, and finding her, prayed her to restore to him the health of his body. And when she maintained that she was innocent and knew nothing about it, he fell upon her, and winding a towel tightly about her neck, choked her, saying, "Unless you give me back my health, you shall die at my hands." Then she, unable to cry out, and growing black, said, "Let me go, and I will heal you." The young man then relaxed the pressure of the towel, and the witch touched him with her hand between the thighs, saying, "Now you have what you desire." And the young man, as he afterwards said, plainly felt, before he had verified it by looking or touching, that his member had been restored to him by the mere touch of the witch. A similar experience is narrated by a certain venerable father from the Dominican house of Spires, well known in the order for the honest of his life and for his learning. One day, he says, while I was hearing confessions, a young man came to me and, in the course of his confession, woefully said that he had lost his member. Being astonished at this, and not being willing to give it easy credence, since the opinion of the wise it is a mark of light-heartedness to believe too easily, I obtained proof of it when I saw nothing on the young man's removing his clothes and showing the place. Then, using the wisest counsel I could, I asked whether he suspected anyone of having so bewitched him. And the young man said that he did suspect someone, but that she was absent and living in Worms. Then I said, "I advise you to go to her as soon as possible, and try your utmost to soften her with gentle words and promises." And he did so, for he came back after a few days and thanked me, saying that he was whole and had recovered everything. And I believed his words, but again proved them by the evidence of my eyes. But there are some points to be noted for the clear understanding of what has already been written concerning this matter. First, it must in no way be believed that such members are really torn right away from the body, but that they are hidden by the devil through some prestidigitory art, so that they can be neither seen nor felt. And this is proved by the authorities and by argument, although it has been treated of before, where Alexander of Hales says that a prestige, properly understood, is an illusion of the devil, which is not caused by any material change, but exists only in the perceptions of him who is deluded, either in his interior or exterior senses. With reference to these words, it is to be noted that in the case we are considering, two of the exterior senses, namely those of sight and touch, are deluded, and not the interior senses, namely common sense, fancy, imagination, thought, and memory. But St. Thomas says that they are only four, as has been told before, reckoning fancy and imagination as one, and with some reason, for there is little difference between imagining and fancying. And these senses, and not only the exterior senses, are affected when it is not a case of hiding something, but the causing something to appear to a man either when he is aware or asleep. As when a man who is awake sees things otherwise than as they are, such as seeing someone devour a horse with its rider, or thinking he sees a man transformed into a beast, or thinking that he is himself a beast and must associate with beasts. For then the exterior senses are deluded, and are employed by the interior senses. For by the power of devils, with God's permission, mental images long retained in the treasury of such images, which is the memory, are drawn out, not from the intellectual understanding in which such images are stored, but from the memory, which is the repository of mental images, and is situated at the back of the head, and are presented to the imaginative faculty. And so strongly are they impressed on that faculty, that a man has an inevitable impulse to imagine a horse or a beast when the devil draws from the memory an image of a horse or a beast. And so he is compelled to think that he sees with his external eyes such a beast when there is actually no such beast to see. But it seems to be so by reason of the impulsive force of the devil working by means of those images. And it need not seem wonderful that devils can do this, when even a natural defect is able to effect the same result, as is shown in the case of frantic and melancholy men, and in maniacs and some drunkards, who are unable to discern truly. For frantic men think they see marvelous things, such as beasts and other horrors, when in actual fact they see nothing. See above in the question whether witches can turn the minds of men to love and hatred, where many things are noted. And, finally, the reason is self-evident, for since the devil has power over inferior things except only the soul, therefore he is able to effect certain changes in those things, when God allows, so that things appear to be otherwise than they are. And this he does, as I have said, either by confusing and diluting the organ of sight so that a clear thing appears cloudy, just as after weeping, owing to the collected humors, the light appears to different from that it was before, or by operating on the imaginative faculty by a transmutation of mental images, as has been said, or by some agitation of various humors, so that matters which are earthy and dry seem to be fire or water, as some people make everyone in the house strip themselves naked under the impression that they are swimming in water. Let's see something real quick. It may be asked further, with reference to the above method of devils, whether this sort of illusions can happen indifferently to the good and to the wicked, just as other bodily infirmities can, as will be shown later, be brought by witches even upon those who are in a state of grace. To this question, following the words of Cassian in his second collation of the Abbot Serenus, we must answer that they cannot, and from this it follows that all who are deluded in this way are presumed to be in deadly sin. For he says, as is clear from the words of St. Anthony, the devil can in no way enter the mind or body of any man, nor has the power to penetrate into the thoughts of anybody, unless such a person has first become destitute of all holy thoughts, and is quite bereft and denuded of spiritual contemplation. This agrees with Boethius, where he says in the Consolation of Philosophy, "We had given you such arms that, if you had not thrown them away, you would have been preserved from infirmity." Also, Cassian tells in the same place of two pagan witches, each in his own way malicious, who by their witchcraft sent a succession of devils into the cell of St. Anthony, for the purpose of driving him from there by their temptations, being infected with hatred for the holy man, because a great number of people visited him every day. And though these devils assailed him with the keenest of spurs to his thoughts, yet he drove them away by crossing himself on the forehead and breast, and by prostrating himself in earnest prayer. Therefore we may say that all who are so deluded by devils, not reckoning any other bodily infirmities, are lacking in the gift of divine grace. And so it is said in Tobias 6, "The devil has power against those who are subject to their lusts." This is also substantiated by what we told in the first part, in the question, whether witches can change men into the shapes of beasts. For we told of a girl who was turned into a filly, as she herself, and, except St. Macarius, all who looked at her were persuaded. But the devil could not deceive the senses of the holy man, and when she was brought to him to be healed, he saw true woman and not a horse, while on the other hand everyone else exclaimed that she seemed to be a horse. And the saint by his prayers freed her and the others from that illusion, saying that this had happened to her because she had not attended sufficiently to holy things, nor used as she should holy confession in the Eucharist. And for this reason, because in her honesty she would not consent to the shameful proposal of a young man, she had caused a Jew who was a witch to bewitch the girl, so that, by the power of the devil, he turned her into a filly. We may summarize our conclusions as follows. Devils can, for their profit and probation, injure the good in their fortunes, that is, in such exterior things as riches, fame, and bodily health. This is clear from the case of the blessed Job, who was afflicted by the devil in such matters, but such injuries are not of their own causing, so that they cannot be led or driven into any sin, although they can be tempted both inwardly and outwardly in the flesh. But the devil cannot afflict the good with this sort of illusions, either actively or passively. Oh. Sorry, Liz, chatbot's not working. I'm gonna have to fix it later. Not actively, but deluding their senses as they do of others who are not in a state of grace, and not passively by taking away their male organs by some glamour. For in these two respects they could never injure Job, especially in regard to the venereal act. For he was of such continence that he was able to say, "I have vowed a vow with my eyes that I shall never think about a virgin, and still less about another man's wife." Nevertheless, the devil knows that he has great power over sinners. See St. Luke 11, "When a strong man armed keepeth his palace, his goods are in peace." But it may be asked as to illusions in respect of the male organ, whether granted that the devil cannot impose this illusion on those in a state of grace in a passive way, he cannot still do so in an active sense, the argument being that the man in a state of grace is deluded because he ought to see the member in its right place, when he who thinks it has been taken away from him, as well as other bystanders, does not see in its place. But if this is conceded, it seems to be contrary to what has been said. It can be said that there is not so much force in the active as in the passive loss, meaning by active loss, not his who bears the loss, but his who sees the loss from without, as is self-evident. Therefore, although a man in a state of grace can see the loss of another, and to that extent the devil can delude his senses, Yet he cannot passively suffer such loss in his own body as, for example, to be deprived of his member, since he is not subject to list. In the same way, the converse is true, as the angel said to Tobias, those who are given to lust, the devil has power over them. And what then is to be thought of those witches who in this way sometimes collect male organs in great numbers, as many as 20 or 30 members together, and put them in a bird's nest, or shut them up in a box, where they move themselves like living members, and eat oats and corn, as has been seen by many and is a matter of common report? It is to be said that it is all done by devil's work and illusion, for the senses of those who see them are deluded in the way we have said. For a certain man tells that, when he had lost his member, he approached a known witch to ask her to restore it to him. She told the afflicted man to climb a certain tree, and that he might take which he liked out of the nest in which there were several members. And when he tried to take a big one, the witch said, "You must not take that one," adding, "because it belongs to a parish priest." All these things are caused by devils through an illusion of or glamour, in the manner we have said, by confusing the organ of vision, by transmuting the mental images in the imaginative faculty. And it must not be said that these members which are shown are devils and assumed members, just as they sometimes appear to witches and men in assumed aerial bodies, and converse with them. And the reason is that they effect this thing by an easier method, namely by drawing out an inner mental image from the repository of the memory and impressing it on the imagination. And if anyone wishes to say that they could go to work in a similar way, when they are said to converse with witches and other men in assumed bodies, that is, that they could cause such apparitions by changing the mental images in the imaginative faculty, so that when men thought the devils were present in assumed bodies, they were really nothing but illusions caused by such a change of the mental images in the inner perceptions. It is to be said that if the devil had no other purpose than merely to show himself in human form, then there would be no need for him to appear in an assumed body, since he could effect his purpose well enough by the aforesaid illusion. But this is not so, for he has another purpose, namely, to speak and eat with them, and to commit other abominations. Therefore, it is necessary that he should himself be present, placing himself actually in sight in an assumed body, for as St. Thomas says, where the angel's power is, there he operates. And it may be asked if the devil by himself, and without any witch, takes away anyone's virile member, whether there is any difference between one sort of deprivation and the other. In addition to what has been said in the first part of this work on the question whether witches can take away a member, he does actually take it away, and it is actually restored when it has to be restored. Secondly, as it is not taken away without injury, so it is not without pain. Thirdly, that he never does this unless compelled by a good angel, for by so doing he cuts off a great source of profit to him. For he knows that he can work more witchcraft on that act than on other human acts. For God permits him to do more injury to that than to other human acts, as he has been said, but none of the above points apply when he works through the agency of a witch, with God's permission. And if it is asked whether the devil is more apt to injure men and creatures by himself than through a witch, it can be said that there is no comparison between the two cases, for he is infinitely more apt to do harm than the agency of witches. First, because he thus gives greater offense to God by usurping to himself a creature dedicated to him. Secondly, because when God is the more offended, he allows him to be more power of injuring men. And thirdly, for his own gains, which he places in the perdition of souls. Okay. Animal Crossing. Uh-oh. Let me see. Now we'll fix it later. I couldn't get the bot to load, so actually let's do it quick. Let's see. Did I get the email? Nope. Oh well. Yeah, I got a haircut. What is it? A little over a week, more than a week ago. It's been a bit. Time just is all meshed together. That's why I feel it's been 2 weeks, or I skipped 2 weeks of reading. So it's weird being back reading again. All right. Chapter 8. Of the manner whereby they change men into the shapes of beasts. But that witches, by the power of devils, change men into the shapes of beasts, for this is their chief manner of transmutation. Although it has been sufficiently proved in the first part of the work, question 10, whether witches can do such things, nevertheless, since that question with its arguments and solutions may be rather obscure to some, especially since no actual examples are adduced to prove them, and even the method by which they so transform themselves is not explained. Therefore, we add the present exposition by the resolution of several doubts. And first, that canon 26, question 5, Episcopi, is not to be understood in this matter in the way in which even many learned men, but would that their learning were good, are deceived, who do not fear to affirm publicly in their sermons that such prestidigatory transmutations are in no way possible even by the power of devils. And we have often said that this doctrine is greatly to the detriment of the faith, and strengthens the witches, who rejoice very much in such sermons. But such preachers, as has been noted, touch only the outer surface and fail to reach the inner meaning of the words of the canon. For when it says, whoever believes that any creature can be made or can be changed for the better or the worse, or be transformed into any other shape or likeness except by the Creator himself who made all, is without doubt an infidel. The reader must here remark two chief things. First, concerning the words, be made, and secondly, concerning the words, be transformed into another likeness. And as to the first, it is answered that be made can be understood in two ways, namely, as meaning be created, or as in the sense of the natural production of anything. Now, in the first sense, it belongs only to God, as is well known, who is in his infinite might can make something out of nothing. But in the second sense, there is a distinction to be drawn between creatures. For some are perfect creatures, like a man and an ass, etc., and other are imperfect, such as serpents, frogs, mice, etc. For they can also be generated from putrefaction. Now the canon obviously speaks only of the former sort, not of the second, for in the case of the second it can be proved from what Blessed Albert says in his book on animals, where he asks whether devils can make true animals, and still with this difference, that they cannot do so in an instant, as God does, but by some motion, however sudden, as is shown in the case of the magicians in Exodus 7. The reader may, if he likes, refer to some of the remarks in the question we have quoted in the first part of the work, and in the solution of the first argument. Secondly, it is said that they cannot transmute any creature. You may say that transmutation is of two sorts, substantial and accidental, and this accidental is again of two kinds, consisting either in the natural form belonging to the thing which is seen, or in a form which does not belong to the thing which is seen, but exists only in the organs and perceptions of him who sees. The canon speaks of the former, and especially of formal and actual transmutation, in which one substance is transmuted into another, and this sort of only God can effect, who is the creator of such actual substances. And it speaks also of the second, although the devil can effect that, in so far as, with God's permission, he causes certain diseases and induces some appearance on the accidental body, as when a face appears to be leprous, or some such thing. But properly speaking, it is not such matters that are in question, but apparitions and glamours, by which things seem to be transmuted into other likenesses. And we say that the words of the canon cannot exclude such transmutations, for their existence is proved by authority, by reason, and by experience, namely by certain experiences related by St. Augustine in Book 18, Chapter 7 of the De Situa, and by the arguments and explanation of them. For among other prestidigatory transformations, he mentions that the very famous sorceress, Circe, changed the companions of Ulysses into beasts, and that certain innkeepers' wives had turned their guests into beasts of burden. He mentions also that the companions of Diomedes were changed into birds, and for a long time flew about the temple of Diomedes, and that Praestantius tells it for a fact that his father said that he had been a pack horse, and had carried corn with other animals. Now when the companions of Ulysses were changed into beasts, it was only an appearance or a deception of the eyes, for the animals' shapes were drawn out of the repository or memory of images, and impressed on the imaginative faculty, and so imaginary vision was caused, and through the strong impression on the other senses and organs, the beholder thought that he saw animals, in the manner of which we have already treated. But how these things can be done by the devil's power without injury will be shown later. I just want to type out this word I keep having trouble with. It's like got too many syllables. Did that go? God darn it. Didn't work. Don't even know if I'm spelling that right. What the hell is that word? Alright. The story page, I felt like it was a bit fatter. 91. Okay. But when the guests were changed into beasts of burden by the innkeepers' wives, and when the father of Praestantius thought he was a pack horse and carried corn, it is to be noted that in these cases there were three deceptions. First, that those men were caused by a glamour to see to be changed into beasts of burden, and this change was caused in the way we have said. Second, that devils invisibly bore those burdens up when they were too heavy to be carried. Third, that those who seemed to others to be changed in shape seemed also to themselves to be changed into beasts, as it happened to Nebuchadnezzar, who lived for 7 years eating straw like an ox. And as to the comrades of Diomedes, being changed into birds and flying round his temple, it is to be said that this Diomedes was one of the Greeks who went to the siege of Troy, and when he wished to return home, he was drowned with his comrades in the sea. And then, at the suggestion of some idol, a temple was built to him, that he might be numbered among the gods, and for a long time, to keep that error alive, devils in the shape of birds flew about in place of his companions. Therefore that superstition was one of the glamours we have spoken of, for it was not caused by the impression of mental images on the imaginative faculty, but by their flying in the sight of men in the assumed bodies of birds. But if it is asked whether the devils could have deluded the onlookers by the above-mentioned method of working upon the mental images, and not by assuming aerial bodies like flying birds, the answer is that they could have done so. For it was the opinion of some, as St. Thomas tells in the second book of Sentences, Part 8, Article 2, that no angel, good or bad, ever assumed the body, but that all that we read in the Scripture about their appearances was caused by a glamour or by the imaginary vision. And here the learned saint notes a difference between a glamour and an imaginary vision. For in a glamour there may be an exterior object which is seen, but it seems other than it is. But imaginary vision does not necessarily require an exterior object, but can be caused without that, and only by those inner mental images impressed on the imagination. So, following their opinion, the comrades of Diomedes were not represented by devils in the assumed bodies and likeness of birds, but only by a fantastic and imaginary vision caused by working upon those mental images, etc. But the learned saint condemns this as an erroneous and not a simple opinion, though it is piously believed it is not actually heretical, although such appearances of good and bad angels may at times have been imaginary, with no assumed body. But as he says, the saints are agreed that the angels also appeared to the actual sight, and such appearance was in an assumed body, and the scriptural text reads more as if it speaks of bodily appearance than imaginary or prestigitatory ones. Therefore, we can say for the present concerning any visions like that of the comrades of Diomedes, that although those comrades could by the devil's work have appeared in the imaginary vision of the beholders in the manner we have said, yet it is rather presumed that they were caused to be seen by devils in assumed aerial bodies like flying birds, or else that other natural birds were caused by devils to represent them. I'm sorry. It's not working. Chatbot is fart. Let me see. Yeah, it's frustrating me that it wouldn't work. That's why it took so long to get started. Because Twitch isn't sending me my code. Alright. Where are we? And now I want a beer. Darn it. Chapter 9. How devils may enter the human body and the head without doing any hurt when they cause such metamorphosis by means of prestidigitation. That word. Concerning the method of causing these illusory transmutations, it may further be asked whether the devils are then inside the bodies and heads of those who are deceived, and whether the latter are to be considered as possessed by devils, how it can happen without injury to the inner perceptions and faculties that a mental image is transferred from one inner faculty to another, and whether or not such work ought to be considered miraculous. First, we must again refer to a distinction between such illusory glamours, for sometimes the outer perceptions only are affected, and sometimes the inner perceptions are diluted and so affect the outer perceptions. In the former case, the glamour can be caused without the devils entering into the other perceptions, and merely by an exterior illusion, as when the interposition of some other body, or in some other way, or when he himself assumes a body and imposes himself on the vision. But in the latter case, it is necessary that he must first occupy the head and the faculties, and this is proved by authority and by reason. And it is not a valid objection to say that two created spirits cannot be in one in the same place, and that the soul pervades the whole of the body. For on this question there is the authority of St. John Damascene, when he says, "Where the angel is, there he operates." And St. Thomas in the second book of Sentences, Part 7, Article 5, says, "All angels, good and bad, by their natural power, which is superior to all bodily power, are able to transmute our bodies." And this is clearly true, not only by reason of the superior nobility of their nature, but because the whole mechanism of the world and all corporeal creatures are administered by angels. As St. Gregory says in the fourth dialogue, "In the visible world nothing can be disposed except by an invisible creature. Therefore all corporeal matters are governed by the angels, who are also called, not only by the holy doctors, but also by all the philosophers, the powers which move the stars. It is clear also from the fact that all human bodies are moved by their souls, just as all other matter is moved by the stars, and the powers which move them. Any who wish may refer to St. Thomas in the first part, question 90, article 1. From this it is concluded that, since devils operate there where they are, therefore when they confuse the fancy and the inner perceptions, they are existing in them. Again, although to enter the soul is possible only to God who created it, yet devils can, with God's permission, enter our bodies, and they can then make impressions on the inner faculties corresponding to the bodily organs, and by those impressions the organs are affected in proportion as the inner perceptions are affected, in the way which has been shown, that the devil can draw out some image retained in a faculty corresponding to one of the senses, as he draws from the memory, which is in the back part of the head, an image of a horse, and locally moves that phantasm to the middle part of the head, where are the cells of imaginative power, and finally to the sense of reason, which is in the front of the head, and he causes such a sudden change and confusion that such objects are necessarily thought to be actual things seen with the eyes. This can be clearly exemplified by the natural defect in frantic men and other maniacs. But if it is asked how he can do this without causing pain in the head, the answer is easy. For in the first place, he does not cause any actual physical change in the organs, but only moves the mental images. And secondly, he does not effect these changes by injecting any active quality which would necessarily cause pain, since the devil is himself without any corporeal quality, and can therefore operate without the use of any such quality. Thirdly, as has been said, he effects these transmutations only by a local movement from one organ to another, and not by other movements through which painful transformations are sometimes caused. And as for the objection that two spirits cannot separately exist in the same place, and that since the soul exists in the head, how can a devil be there also? It is to be said that the soul is thought to reside in the center of the heart, in which it communicates with all the members by an outpouring of life. An example can be taken from a spider, which feels the middle of its web when any part of the web is touched. However, St. Augustine says in his book on the spirit and soul that it is all in all, and all in every part of the body. Granting that the soul is in the head, still the devil can work there, for his work is different from the work of the soul. The work of the soul is in the body, to inform it and fill it with life, so that it exists not merely locally, but in the whole matter. But the devil works in such a part, in such a place of the body, affecting his change in respect of the mental images. Therefore, since there is no confusion between their respective operations, they can both exist together in the same part of the body. There is also the question whether such men are to be considered obsessed or frenzied, that is, possessed of devils, but this is considered separately, namely, whether it is possible through the work of witches for a man to be obsessed with a devil, that is, that the devil should actually and bodily possess him. And this question is specially discussed in the following chapter, since it has this special difficulty, namely, whether this can be caused through the operations of witches. But as to the question whether the temporal works of witches and devils are to be considered as miracles or of a miraculous nature, it is to be said that they are so, in so far as they are beyond the order of created nature as known to us, and are done by creatures unknown to us. But they are not, properly speaking, miracles, as are those which are outside the whole of created nature, as are the miracles of God and the saints. See what was written in the first part of this work, in the fifth question, in refutation of the third error. But there are those who object that this sort of work must not be considered miracles, but simply works of the devil, since the purpose of miracles is the strengthening of the faith, and they must not be conceded to the adversary of the faith, and also because the sign of the Antichrist are called lying signs by the apostle. First, it is to be said that to work miracles is the gift of freely given grace, and they can be done by bad men and bad spirits up to the limits of the power which is in them. Wherefore the miracles wrought by the good can be distinguished from those wrought by the wicked in at least three ways. First, the signs which are given by the good are done by divine power, in such matters as are beyond the capacity of their own natural power, such as raising the dead and things of that sort, which the devils are not able to accomplish in truth, but only by an illusion. So Simon Magus moved the head of a dead man, but such manifestations cannot last long. Secondly, they can be distinguished by their utility, for the miracles of the good are of a useful nature, as the healing of sickness and such things, but the miracles done by witches are concerned with harmful and idle things, as when they fly in the air, or benumb the limbs of men, or such things, and St. Peter assigns this difference in the Itinerarium of Clement. The third difference relates to the faith, for the miracles of the good are ordained by the edification of the faith and of good living, whereas the miracles of the wicked are manifestly detrimental to the faith and to righteousness. They are distinguished also by the way in which they are done. For the good do miracles in a pious and reverent invocation of the divine name, but witches and wicked men work them by certain ravings and invocations of devils. And there is no difficulty in the fact that the apostle called the works of the devil and Antichrist lying wonders, for the marvels so done by divine permission are true in some respects and false in others. They are true in so far as they are within the limits of the devil's power, but they are false when he appears to do things which are beyond his power, such as raising the dead or making the blind to see. For when he appears to do the former, he either enters into the dead body or else removes it, and himself takes its place in an assumed aerial body. And in the latter case he takes away the sight by a glamour, and then suddenly restores it by taking away the disability he has caused, not by bringing light to the inner perceptions, as is told in the legend of Bartholomew. Indeed, all the marvelous works of Antichrist and of witches can be said to be lying signs, inasmuch as their only purpose is to deceive. See St. Thomas, Part 8, Dear to Daemonon. Should try and get Bond to pronounce that his next stream. Would be funny. We may also quote here the distinction which is drawn in the Compendium of Theological Truth between a wonder and a miracle. For in a miracle 4 conditions are required: that it should be done by God, that it should be beyond the existing order of nature, thirdly, that it should be manifest, and fourthly, that it should be for the corroboration of the faith. But since the works of witches fail to fulfill at least the first and last conditions, therefore they may be called wonderful works, but not miracles. It can also be argued in this way: although witches' works can in a sense be said to be miraculous, yet some miracles are supernatural, some unnatural, and some preternatural. And they are supernatural when they can be compared with nothing in nature or natural power, as when a virgin gives birth. They are unnatural when they are against the normal course of nature, but do not overstep the limits of nature, such as causing the blind to see. And they are preternatural when they are done in a manner parallel to that of nature, as when rods are changed into serpents, for this can be done naturally also, through long putrefaction on account of seminal reasons, and thus the works of magicians may be said to be marvelous. It is expedient to recount an actual example and then to explain it step by step. There is a town in the Diocese of Strasbourg, the name of which it is charitable and honorable to withhold, in which a workman was one day chopping some wood to burn in his house. A large cat suddenly appeared and began to attack him, and when he was driving it off, another even larger one came and attacked him with the first more fiercely. And when he again tried to drive them away, behold, 3 of them together attacked him, jumping up at his face and biting and scratching his legs. In great fright and, as he said, more panic-stricken than he had ever been, he crossed himself and, leaving his work, fell upon the cats, which were swarming over the wood, and again leaping at his face and throat, and with difficulty drove them away by beating one on the head, another on the legs, and another on the back. After the space of an hour, while he was again engaged upon his task, 2 servants of the town magistrates came and took him as a malefactor, and led him into the presence of the bailiff or judge. And the judge, looking at him from a distance and refusing to hear him, ordered him to be thrown into the deepest dungeon of a certain tower or prison, where those who were under sentence of death were placed. The man cried out, and for 3 days bitterly complained to the prison guards that he should suffer in that way, when he was conscious of no crime. But the more the gods tried to procure of him a hearing, the more furious the judge became, expressing in the strongest terms his indignation that so great a malefactor had not yet acknowledged his crime, but dared to proclaim his innocence, when the evidence of the facts proved his horrible crime. But although these could not prevail upon him, yet the judge was induced by the advice of other magistrates to grant the man a hearing. So when he was brought out of prison into the presence of the judge, and the judge refused to look at him, the poor man threw himself before the knees of other magistrates, pleading that he might know the reason for his misfortune. And the judge broke into these words: "You most wicked of men, how can you not acknowledge your crime? At such a time, on such a day, you beat 3 respected matrons of this town, so that they lie in their beds, unable to rise or to move." The poor man cast his mind back to the events of that day and that hour, and said, "Never in all my life have I struck or beaten a woman. And I can prove by credible witnesses that at that time on that day I was busy chopping wood, and an hour afterwards your servants found me still engaged on that task." Then the judge again exclaimed in a fury, "See how he tries to conceal his crime. The women are bewailing their blows. They exhibit the marks and publicly testify that he struck them." Then the poor man considered more closely on that even, and said, "I remember that I struck some creatures at that time, but they were not women." The magistrates in astonishment asked him to relate what sort of creatures he had struck, and he told, to their great amazement, all that had happened as we have related it. So, understanding that it was the work of the devil, they released the poor man and let him go away unharmed, telling him not to speak of this matter to anyone, but it could not be hidden from those devout persons present who were zealous for the faith. How much more? Yeah, let's go. Chapter 10 of the method by which devils through the operation of witches sometimes actually possess men. It has been shown in the previous chapter how devils can enter the heads and other parts of the body of men, and can move the inner mental images from place to place, but someone may doubt whether they are able, at the instance of witches, to obsess men entirely, or feel some uncertainty about their various methods of causing such obsession without the instance of witches. And to clear up these doubts, we must undertake 3 explanations. First, as to the various methods of possession. Secondly, how at the instance of witches and with God's permission, devils at times possess men in all those ways. Thirdly, we must substantiate our arguments with facts and examples. With references to the first, we must make an exception of the general method by which the devil inhabits a man in any mortal sin. St. Thomas, in Book 3, Question 3, speaks of this method, where he considers the doubt whether the devil always substantially possesses a man when he commits mortal sin. And the reason for this doubt is that the indwelling Holy Ghost always forms a man with grace, according to I Corinthians 3, "Ye are the temple of God, and the Spirit of God dwelleth in you." And since guilt is opposed to grace, it would seem that there were opposing forces in the same place. And there he proves that to possess a man can be understood in 2 ways, either with regard to the soul or with regard to the body. And in the first way, it is not possible for the devil to possess the soul, since God alone can enter that. Therefore, the devil is not in this way the cause of sin, which the Holy Spirit permits the soul itself to commit. So there is no similitude between the 2. But as to the body, we may say that the devil can possess a man in two ways, just as there are two classes of men, those who are in sin and those who are in grace. In the first way, we may say that since a man is by any mortal sin brought into the devil's service, in so far as the devil provides the outer suggestion of sin, either to the senses or to the imagination, to that extent he is said to inhabit the character of a man, when he is moved by every stirring temptation like a ship in the sea without a rudder. The devil can also essentially possess a man, as is clear in the case of frantic men, but this rather belongs to the question of punishment than that of sin, as will be shown, and bodily punishments are not always the consequence of sin, but are inflicted now upon sinners and now upon the innocent. Therefore, both those who are and those who are not in a state of grace can, in the depth of incomprehensible judgment of God, be essentially possessed by devils. And though this method of possession is not quite pertinent to our inquiry, we have set it down lest it should seem impossible to anyone that, with God's permission, men should at times be substantially inhabited by devils at the instance of witches. We may say, therefore, that just as there are 5 ways in which devils by themselves, without witches, can injure and possess men, so they can also do so in those ways at the instance of witches, since then God is the more offended. And greater power of molesting men is allowed to the devil through witches, and the methods are briefly the following, accepting the fact that they sometimes plague a man through his external possessions, sometimes they injure men only in their own bodies, sometimes in their faculties, sometimes they only tempt them inwardly and outwardly, others they at times deprive of the use of their reason, others they change into the appearance of irrational beasts. We shall speak of these methods singly. But first we shall rehearse 5 reasons why God allows men to be possessed, for the sake of preserving a due order in our matter. For sometimes a man is possessed for his own advantage, sometimes for a slight sin of another, and sometimes for his own venial sin, sometimes for another's heavy sin. For all these reasons, let no one doubt that God allows such things to be done by devils at the instance of witches. And it is better to prove each of them by the Scriptures rather than by recent examples, since new things are always strengthened by old examples. For an example of the first is clearly shown in the Dialogue of Severus, a very dear disciple of St. Martin, where he tells that a certain father of very holy life was so gifted by grace with the power of expelling devils that they were put to flight not only by his words, but even by his letters or his hair shirt. And since the father became very famous in the world, and felt himself tempted with vainglory, although he manfully resisted that vice, yet, that he might be the more humiliated, he prayed with the whole heart to God that he might be for 5 months possessed by a devil, and this was done, for he was at once possessed and had to be put in chains, and everything had to be applied to him which is customary in the case of demoniacs. But at the end of the 5th month he was immediately delivered both from all vainglory and from the devil. But we do not read, nor is it for the present maintained, that for this reason a man can be possessed by a devil through the witchcraft of another man, although, as we have said, the judgments of God are incomprehensible. For the second reason, when someone is possessed because of the light sin of another, St. Gregory gives an example. The blessed abbot Eleutherius, a most devout man, was spending the night near a convent of virgins, who unknown to him ordered to be put by his cell a young boy, who used to be tormented all night by the devil. But on that same night the boy was delivered from the devil by the presence of the Father. When the abbot learned of this, and the boy now being placed in the holy man's monastery after many days, he began to exult rather immoderately over the boy's liberation, and said to his brother monks, the devil was playing his pranks with those sisters, but he had not presumed to approach this boy, since he came to the servants of God. And behold, the devil at once began to torment the boy. and by the tears and fasting of the holy man and his brethren he was with difficulty delivered, but on the same day. And indeed, that an innocent person should be possessed for the slight fault of another is not surprising when men are possessed by devils for their own light fault, or for another's heavy sin, or for their own heavy sin, and some also at the instance of witches. Cassia, in his first collation of the abbot Serenus, gives an example of how one Moses was possessed for his own venial sin. This Moses, he says, was a hermit of upright and pious life, but because on one occasion he engaged in a dispute with the abbot Macarius, and went a little too far in the expression of a certain opinion, he was immediately delivered up to a terrible devil, who caused him to avoid his natural excrements through his mouth, and that this scourge was inflicted by God for the sake of purgation, lest any stain of his momentary fault should remain in him, is clear from his miraculous cure. For by continual prayer and submission to the abbot Macarius, the vile spirit was quickly driven away and departed from him. A similar case is that related by St. Gregory in his first dialogue of the nun who ate a lettuce without having first made the sign of the cross, and was set free by the blessed Father Equitus. In the same dialogue, St. Gregory tells an example of the fourth case, where someone is possessed because of the heavy sin of another. The blessed Bishop Fortunatus had driven the devil from a possessed man, and the devil began to walk about the streets of the city in the guise of a pilgrim, crying out, "O the holy man Bishop Fortunatus, see, he has cast me a pilgrim out of my lodging, and I can find no rest anywhere." Then a certain man, sitting with his wife and son, invited the pilgrim to lodge with him, and asking why he had been turned out, was delighted with the derogatory story of the holy man, which the pilgrim had invented. And thereupon the devil entered his son, and cast him upon the fire, and killed him. And then for the first time did the unhappy father understand whom he had received as a guest. And fifthly, we read many examples of men being possessed for their own heavy sin, both in the Holy Scripture and in the passions of the saints. For in I Kings 15, Saul was possessed for disobedience to God. And as we have said, we have mentioned all these so that it need not seem to anyone impossible that men should also be possessed because of the crimes of, and at the instance of, witches. And we shall be able to understand the various methods of such possession by quoting actual examples. In the time of Pope Pius II, the following was the experience of one of us two inquisitors before he entered upon his office in the Inquisition. A certain Bohemian from the town of Dachau brought his only son, a secular priest, to Rome to be delivered because he was possessed. It happened that I, one of us inquisitors, went into the refectory, and that priest and his father came and sat down at the same table with me. We saluted each other and talked together as is customary, and the father kept sighing and praying Almighty God that his journey might prove to have been successful. I felt great pity for him, and began to ask what was the reason of his journey and of his sorrow. Then he, in the hearing of his son, who was sitting next to me at the table, answered, "Alas, I have a son possessed by a devil, and with great trouble and expense I have brought him here to be delivered." And when I asked where the son was, he showed me him sitting by my side. I was a little frightened, and looked at him closely. And because he took his food with such modesty, and answered piously to all questions, I began to doubt that he was not possessed, but that some infirmity had happened to him. Then the son himself told what had happened, showing how and for how long he had been possessed, and saying, "A certain witch brought this evil upon me, for I was rebuking her on some matter concerned with the discipline of the church, upbraiding her rather strongly, since she was of an obstinate disposition, when she said that after a few days that would happen to me, which has happened. And the devil which possesses me has told me that a charm was placed by the witch under a certain tree, and that until it was removed I could not be delivered. But he would not tell me which tree was the tree. But I would not in the least have believed his words if he had not at once informed me of the facts of the case. For when I asked him about the length of the intervals during which he had the use of his reason more than is usual in the case of persons possessed, he answered, I am only deprived of the use of my reason when I wish to contemplate holy things or to visit sacred places. For the devil specifically told me in his own words, uttered through my mouth, that because he had up to that time been much offended by my sermons to the people, we would in no way allow me to preach. For according to his father, he was a preacher full of grace and loved by all. But I, the inquisitor, wishing for proofs, had him taken for a fortnight and more to various holy places, and especially the church of St. Praxedes the Virgin, where there in part of the marble pillar to which our Saviour was bound when he was scourged, and to the place where St. Peter the Apostle was crucified. In all these places he uttered horrible cries while he was being exorcised, now saying that he wished to come forth, and after a little maintaining the contrary. And as we have said before, in all his behavior he remained a sober priest, without any eccentricity, except during the process of any exorcisms, and when these were finished, and the stole was taken from his neck, he showed no sign of madness or any immoderate action. But when he passed any church, and genuflected in honor of the glorious Virgin, the devil made him thrust his tongue far out of his mouth, and when he was asked whether he could not restrain himself from doing this, he answered, I cannot help myself at all, for so he uses all my limbs and organs, my neck, my tongue, and my lungs, whenever he pleases, causing me to speak or to cry out, and I hear the words as if they were spoken by myself, but I am altogether unable to restrain them. And when I try to engage in prayer, he attacks me more violently, thrusting out my tongue. And there was in the church of St. Peter a column brought from Solomon's temple, by virtue of which many who are obsessed with devils are liberated, because Christ had stood near it when he preached in the temple. But even here he could not be delivered, owing to the hidden purpose of God, which reserved another method for his liberation. For though he remained shut in by the column for a whole day and night, yet on the following day, after various exorcisms had been performed upon him, with a great concourse of people standing round, he was asked by which part of the column Christ had stood. And he bit the column with his teeth, and crying out, showed the place, saying, Here he stood, and at last he said, I will not go forth. And when he was asked why, he answered in the Italian tongue, although the poor priest did not understand that language. They all practiced such and such things, naming the worst vice of lustfulness. And afterwards the priest asked me, saying, Father, what did those Italian words which came from my mouth? And when I told him, he answered, I heard the words, but I could not understand them. Eventually it proved that this demoniac was of that sort which the Saviour spoke in the Gospel, saying, This sort goeth not out save by prayer and fasting. For a venerable bishop, who had been driven from his see by the Turks, piously took compassion on him, and by fasting on the bread and water for 40 days, and by prayers and exorcisms, at last, through the grace of God, delivered him and sent him back to his home rejoicing. Right. Getting a bit hoarse, so I think I'm going to end there. So I might stream some gaming later, we'll see. And maybe, I'm thinking, since I'm off Friday, doing another reading stream Friday. Kind of make up for it. So, thanks for hanging, Liz, and anyone else who may be there. I'll see yous laters. And maybe get things fixed. Alright, later.